Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Power Rangers, or Saban's Power Rangers, whichever you prefer. Full disclosure, I guess, is that when I was a kid, I was a fan of Power Rangers. I was probably, like, too old for it. I was in, like, 4th grade or something, maybe 4th or 5th, I forget. Point is, I was really into Power Rangers. I actually entered a contest and won with my sister 2 VHSs from Fox 45, the Baltimore Fox affiliate. Because we were huge fans of Power Rangers. We watched it a ton and probably like watched every rip-off, like every channel had a rip-off show of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, so I was super into it. And so nostalgia, if I saw this movie and it reminded me of sitting there and watching Power Rangers with my brother and sister, would have flushed at me and I would be like, holy shit, dude, I like movies, but nostalgia, bah. And I probably wouldn't do that. But in terms of actually doing that, this movie doesn't do that. The problem with that is that Power Rangers is basically not the adaptation that you could probably make now, which is of that cheesy, corny TV show that uses Super Sentai clips and everything like that. You could do that in today's media landscape for audiences now, and we'd probably be cool with it. This decides to instead do an adaptation that's similar to Bryan Singer's X-Men, or that kind of vein in which it's almost sort of embarrassed of what it's adapting for most of the film. You don't see them get their suits or morph for a while. They make it a plot point. They do it sort of organically, so it sort of makes sense and whatever. But they still feel like that line in X-Men where he's like, what would you prefer, yellow and black spandex? Marvel Studios has shown you can do brightly colored stuff and have it be fun and have them be goody two-shoes. Marvel's not cheesy, but I think you could do that nowadays. You look at Marvel Studios, you look at something like Kingsman, I think they could have made a Power Rangers movie at this time that I would have sat down with and went, holy shit, this is like watching Power Rangers when it premiered on Fox, and like people say 93, 94, whenever it premiered. Point is, it would have reminded me of that. I don't blame the director of this. I think the studio was like, this is the Power Rangers movie we are making. And under that guise, I think this director did actually a pretty good job. Instead of with the X-Men film and even like Man of Steel or something, they're pretending like they're doing this different kind of more adult thing that will get people into it, kind of adapting it away from a modern audience. This guy understands that like we're kind of past that part in terms of blockbuster film history, if that's a thing or whatever, where you could have made the one that I was talking about where I'd be like, oh my god, it's like I'm a kid again. He got that, so he's like, well, I obviously can't do that, so let's do the best thing I can under this kind of weird adaptation that sort of misses the point of Power Rangers but gets the explodey stuff. And under that guise, this is a competent and borderline pretty good movie. And before you go like, what the fuck is wrong with you? It actually does. It's not a perfect movie. Even noticed from people who didn't necessarily like it were surprised at certain parts that they liked so much. It does a pretty good job under that guise. And it is very corporate. In fact, it's super corporate. In fact, it has like a product placement thing that's a major plot point. It's so fucking corporate. The Zords exactly look like Transformers in that way that you're like, it's so busy and the designs don't entirely work. It's very much like a studio sanctioned kind of blockbuster in all the kind of studio safe ways we do nowadays. I think what this director understood is trying to do the teen kind of drama within it. And a lot of times when I was watching it, it reminded me of better kind of superhero or sci-fi kind of teen movies. It obviously does remind you of The Breakfast Club with the whole detention thing, which it very much calls back to in such an obvious way that bringing it up is kind of stupid. But it's like if Breakfast Club was with superpowers, or if Breakfast Club just had the first part and maybe like a section in the middle where they go to the Breakfast Club and then at like the end, but the rest is like not like the Breakfast Club at all. In terms of like the character outlines, they basically take the Power Rangers, they do put them into the Breakfast Club that way. I mean, it is character-wise, I get it, but it's like, it's not, but it sort of is. I don't know if it reminds me of Chronicle as much because it's not as much about power and power corrupting and such like that. It's teenagers with superpowers, so on that kind of like service level way to compare things, sure, it's like Chronicle. It actually reminded me a lot of Project Almanac, and the whole time I was like, man, Project Almanac was way better than this movie. Who directed Power Rangers? I totally forget. And then I looked it up and go, oh, the director of Project Almanac. No wonder it reminded me so much of that movie. I think what he seems to understand about Power Rangers is how to get plot points to work, how to get characters to work, how to even get the training to connect to the big action sequence. He actually does it in a way that reminded me of the original Karate Kid. Not as good as the original Karate Kid, but in that kind of nice, almost pro-education way of showing through your training how things you learn at school can actually be applied to life for you to succeed, which is something I actually think is like a really smart way to show training in a movie. Karate Kid did it better, but I think Power Rangers manages to do that. They manage to have actual connections to the characters for the most part. Some don't work as well as others, but I think what they manage to do in the kind of like blockbuster, really broad way they do character kind of sort of works, particularly the character of Billy, played by R.J. Kyler, who calls himself on the spectrum of autism. I don't know enough about autism to make any sort of statements about it. I know people do get offended how it's portrayed in the media, and particularly that Ben Affleck movie. What was that movie? I totally forget it. Doesn't matter. Where it's like an assassin and I reviewed that. Oh my god. I don't even remember. Is it like shooter or banker? The accountant. There we go. Okay. Like, I know sometimes autism is portrayed in maybe the most offensive way plausible. I don't know how, if that portrayal is good or not, but I thought he was probably one of the most compelling characters in the whole film, which speaks a lot to how good of a storyteller this director and screenwriter John Gatton's is, because they managed to make Billy, who was never my favorite character at all when I watched the original Power Rangers, into my favorite character into the movie. He was the best developed. He was kind of like the reason for them being together almost. That actor did a really good job. Like, if I saw him in another thing, I would perk up. Like, oh cool, this guy's here. I like R.J. Kyler. He has a lot of promise as an actor for how well he did in this film, and in fact he kind of made it more interesting. I was like happy when it was like his plot line, frankly, although it sort of does work, like, you know, his friendship cures his autism or something a little bit. But I thought in terms of representation, did a much better job than the thing with the Yellow Ranger, where it sort of just looked like they made a weird sound edit and now she's gay, which was like, I don't know if that's representation or bad sound editing. And when you're like debating over one scene whether she may or may not be gay, it's not exactly representation in fucking 2017 when you have a movie like Moonlight win Best Picture and you're acting like this is a triumph for homosexuality in a blockbuster. I think is a fucking joke. It was such a negligible part of it, it kind of annoys me that it's such a big thing, because it's like, yes, I would like that kind of representation in a blockbuster, but if that's the way you're gonna do it, fuck you. Like, that, what is that? That is not representation. That is bullshit. There's a difference between representation and bullshit, and I don't know if Power Rangers knows it, but it's definitely, it is bullshit. The guy who plays Jason Deckery Montgomery, I think, he looks so much like Zac Efron. I was like, is Zac Efron's brother in this movie? I think a lot of the actors are competent in what they're doing, given decent enough material to work with when they're together as teens, and that's kind of when this movie works the best, before they become Power Rangers. When it's like this teen drama, it feels like the director is most at home. Because of his previous work in Project Almanac, I could really feel that through it. He seems to know teens and kind of know at least the archetypes that teen movies usually have, and is able to work with that very well. Power Rangers was never a teen thing. I mean, there were teens in it, but it was mainly for kids, and it concerns itself mainly being a teen adaptation of that, making it a kind of a weird adaptation. That's kind of one of the problems with this adaptation, is because at the end of the day, you're like, who is this movie for? Like, if you had made it to be like a Power Rangers movie, or like a Power Rangers movie should, but the way you adapted it, it's like, okay, well, modern teens don't maybe like Power Rangers, but I don't know if it's really for them. But it's more for like people like me or younger who have might have nostalgia for it. I guess you're sort of trying to do that, but it's not appealing to directly any of them, and it's not really appealing to 7-year-olds, and it's like oftentimes will go a little too horror, which felt a little inappropriate. I liked Elizabeth Banks as like Rita Repulsa. She's kind of the Power Rangers movie that this should be, the over-the-top hammy kind of performance. She really gets it. Bryan Cranston, it felt like, didn't. He went overly serious. He went for the Power Rangers movie that this is, but I liked his Zordon overall. Bill Hader's great in everything. Bill Hader's so good, I feel like I don't need to talk about how great he is, because he's so good as being a sidekick. I feel like he just did it to cash a check. The Krispy Kreme thing, and I think the end battle sequence, is probably the one part that reminded me most of something like Man of Steel. And it reminds me of that not just because you're destroying a small town USA type of thing, and particularly the product placement, where in this it's Krispy Kremes, and in Man of Steel it was like IHOP or something, and Renda Center maybe, or Midas, I forget. They did some bunch, but in Man of Steel, what actually kind of works better in this action sequence than the Man of Steel one, is that in Man of Steel he just like is thrown through a bunch of product placement, just like by Zod and all those people. It's like really unorganic. And in this, the Krispy Kreme thing, it's a major plot point, and it's kind of how kids would talk about a chain restaurant, and if something cool happened there, they talk about Krispy Kreme like with some reverence, without without realizing how silly that was. I thought they used Krispy Kreme better than you probably ever expect them to. It at least works organically in the plot. Sure, I should call it out for being this sellouty moment, but it so kind of owns its selloutiness that I'm like, fine, you know, at least you got it to work. At least it's not like a ton of product placement like Iron Man walks by a Pepsi machine or something like that. At least like you got it to mean something for it. You know, I'll actually remember Krispy Kreme from this. Maybe that's better advertising. You got it to work organically into the plot, that you got me actually to think about Krispy Kreme and talk about it in this review, thus proving that you've done better product placement than Iron Man just walking by a Pepsi machine or something, which makes it even more evil in a lot of ways. But I actually appreciated how they did that. I thought it was kind of cool. The Power Rangers movie and this director are probably more of just in the competent blockbuster field. It reminds me a bit, and I've heard people compare it to Kong Skull Island, where it just kind of washes over you in its kind of average blockbusterness. Kong Skull Island was a lot more fun, I would say, in terms of all the action sequences. That Kong Skull Island is miles away from this, but this is able to get its kind of reboot origin story thing to work, but it feels like a ton of different movies I've seen before. I think this director kind of owns it in a way. He kind of gets the movie he's adapting, probably more than Bryan Singer did and all those people when they're trying to adapt superhero things and being like quasi-embarrassed about the bright colors and everything like that. In this, it's like he gets like that's the movie he has to make, and he kind of works with that kind of an adaptation in a way I haven't seen many directors do. This guy, he seems to be able to sort of get it to work. There's a sequence where they play the Power Rangers theme and the Zords are coming down. It's like all exciting and everything like that. Maybe the reason this film didn't necessarily do as well as they wanted it to and things is because this movie, probably Lionsgate and the studio, messed with the kind of an adaptation, and it didn't give us necessarily the adaptation that they probably should have. I should have felt like I was watching Power Rangers the same way Marvel Studios feels like I'm reading a comic book on the big screen. This kind of way of adapting doesn't really work anymore, and the director and the cast made the best they could of this movie. But tonally, it does have some weird moments. There are some moments that are a little too horror, which I kind of liked in sort of, but I was also like, yeah, but like, what entirely are you doing overall? Like, what are you trying to say with these moments? You're trying to sell Rita Repulsa as being really scary, but it's not like you're selling the kind of villain she's going to be. She's attacking them with like another giant person, and they're gonna fight and have like a giant, you know, monster movie fight, like ripping out people's teeth and killing people. I mean, it's like you're selling like that you're evil, but like kind of keeps regurgitating the same point. It's like, yeah, I get it, she's bad. I mean, I knew that anyway. You didn't have to keep selling that. This is a very studio controlled kind of a reboot, and this director did the best of it he could. He's kind of a competent journeyman director who's trying to get it to be better than he possibly could. It's much more coherent than something like Transformers or something like that, but it does feel like a bullshit kind of big blockbuster movie for people who have really bad taste in blockbusters to dig. And yeah, it is that, but it's actually sort of good at doing that. It's kind of sort of good at being a blockbuster kind of corporately controlled film that isn't like the most exciting thing in filmmaking ever, and this director finds a way to make it at least better than it probably ever really should be. In a lot of ways, I think Joseph Kahn got more of what he was playing against than this gets what it's actually adapting. If you're willing to sit there and watch a Power Rangers film, you won't be disappointed by this film, but when they eventually make them better adaptation of the Power Rangers to the big screen that is exactly like what the Power Rangers actually are, then you'll probably be much more excited by it, and it'll probably be a much better movie. The real problem with this isn't the Power Rangers themselves, it's the way they adapted it. The studio came at it in the kind of the wrong way. They realized they couldn't do the full dark gritty reboot thing because Joseph Kahn kind of took that away from them, so they had to kind of do it this way, and in a way this is like the more predictable studio way to do it, to be honest, and you did it in probably a better way than most studio reboots. It's just kind of like the older adaptations that we've moved past and kind of reminding me why we've moved past them, why we don't do these things anymore, because kind of this embarrassed way of adapting something is never really a great way to do it. Maybe this is kind of the growing pains of doing something like Power Rangers, and maybe they'll find a better way to adapt it later on, but in terms of what this is, it's just kind of a mess that they cleaned up and made a little more presentable, and this director kind of came up and helped the studio out a lot more, and then they had faith in the thing that they were adapting, and you just kind of have to deal with that while watching it, and if you can't, you probably won't like it, but if you kind of have lesser expectations, this movie soars, probably more than it ever should, because it needs those lessened expectations to work as well as it does. So if you've seen Power Rangers and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.